And here we are, Scott Stevens here on a Wednesday afternoon, where arguably the biggest story going on weather-wise happens to be a fire in northern Colorado, the Cameron Peak Fire, which was ignited by lightning back on August 13th. So here we are, 14 October. So this thing has been going 60 plus days. And social media is lit up because it is on the verge of or on the edge of Fort Collins, Colorado. And that is an area I lived for a time more than a decade ago, but driven by winds of 60, 70, 80 plus miles an hour. This thing has exploded, and we'll be able to look at it from space and then also anticipate whether there's any rainfall. More likely, that would be nice to see if we were to see snowfall come from that to give those firefighters, those crews, those individuals, and those folks that are on the verge of having to evacuate or already have evacuated by mandate or simply out of their own will to get out of the way of that particular fire. So it's a little bit of a scary situation that's going on there today. All right, let's come over here and take a look at some of the stuff. Here we are with Reed Tamir, who is on the scene at so many crazy situations. He's also a Colorado native. Crazy, ominous pyrocumulus over the Cameron Peak Fire from west of Fort Collins, Colorado. This photograph was just shared with him, and that's probably the rail lines. I want to say Highway 14 to be near that, and maybe that's it right there. But nonetheless, that is throwing up one crazy plume of smoke across the city. And you don't have to go too far on social media before you run into that, especially if you hashtag Cameron Peak Fire. October is here. Northern Lights, Aurora Borealis, Alaska, Fairbanks, and so forth and so on. And Robin had posted yesterday, or mentioned yesterday, just she was surprised to see these Northern Lights as far south as Idaho, which is where I have seen most of them. In fact, all of them over the course of my life was in Idaho. And now that we have even a weaker magnetic field, it takes less and less of activity, solar activity, to ultimately trigger these events. And this is more Alaska. And this, honestly, is not too bad a time of year to get up there to see these things because, as you can see in the photographs, we're not buried in snow. So you're not outside bundled up, shivering at minus 10, minus 20 degree weather to have a look at the sky. It's much more comfortable to do when the temperatures are in the 40s and 50s, and then your endurance has some endurance. All right, this is another one of the reasons why we're seeing the strong winds and the issues with that Cameron Peak Fire. Strong cold front spurring winds across all of the west, including gusts over 70 miles an hour. At the surface, this occurred around 9:15 this morning with sustained winds at 68 miles per hour at Birdhound Pass in Colorado. Elevation, again, you're up there a bit, 11,000 plus feet, but at 104 miles an hour. And this was at an observing site. So easily there were other locations where those kind of wind speeds could or were experienced, not recorded necessarily, but certainly experienced. We get into Pennsylvania. Check out this beautiful setting of the Delaware Water Gap, where fall colors and water make this for an award-winning Wednesday combo. Yeah, when you've had some rain and the vegetation has had some water to kind of go through the transition into preparing for winter, that makes for much healthier vegetation. That's really been a tough thing to do out west, where not a lot of water has fallen to help the plant kingdom prepare for the change of the season. All right, there's some old folklore among Idahoans that the fall winds blow for a week and then they stop, and then it's winter, and then when they start again, it's going to be spring. Spending most of my life growing up in Idaho, well, we're windy for the third straight day. We'll just have to have a look at how long before we end up with these kind of conditions. This was up in Calgary, Alberta. And that is the cold up there driving that event, driving that cold front off to the south. As you can even see in this, we'll have to animate this, play this, that we still have leaves on the trees. So this is, I don't want to say an early snowfall because we are mid-October, but because the West has been so mild for so much of this winter, the trees have, they got, let's just say, an early shot across the bow the first week of September that winter was coming. But now it's really here. So here we are with a time lapse showing that Cameron Peak plume just racing off towards the east, driven by these intense winds. This also from Fort Collins, Colorado, and Larimer County. and that has just only gotten worse over the course of the day. We mentioned yesterday about La Nina, and it really didn't matter which nation the computer models came from. They saw the La Nina that was going to remain through the wintertime season, but what ultimately that means is the ridge stays in place out over the west. And in doing so, that keeps a dry flow into much of the middle part of the nation. And then the west will only see occasional undercutting closed lows. One of those may happen in about 7 to 10 days' time across California, giving them their first seasonal rainfall. But on the whole, it looks like it's weak. But the rest of the planet's oceans look to be terribly warm, the exception being this cool upwelling coming off the coast of South America and then driving eastbound right along the current. And yeah, there's that wind out there. I've got my curtains drawn, but the window is absolutely open just because the sun, regardless of the season, is still hot. All right, here's the Cameron Peak Fire. It is a wildfire updated 2 minutes ago, 56% contained, and that may be just the west, north, and south sides. The east side obviously is not, as the winds are continuing to drive it. Its size is now at 135,000 acres, and you can see it spreading into Larimer County through the Roosevelt Forest, the Mummy Range, and then it's here, the Horsetooth Reservoir, and some of these other places that have had, I don't want to say incursions, but they have been developed. And that's the sad truth of it. They've been developed. So those locations are at risk, especially if the winds continue to be as robust as they have been lately. All right, the Interagency Fire Center has dropped the national preparedness from 5 to 4 last week and now back to 3. And we're still dealing with no new large fires. 4 fires were contained, but the bulk of the activity remains in California and then also in Idaho as far as fire count. The 3 in Colorado is honestly all they can handle. And here's the plume right there. That's the fire right there. Let's come on in. Let's zoom in just a little bit more. But looking at this from the geoengineering aspect and noticing these ripples, these odd shaped ripples, those ripples are not necessarily cloud-based. And you can see them beginning to show up inside the smoke plume, meaning they're there whether they're visible or not. And that has been my discovery when you're looking at time-lapse imagery, that the chemtrail planes are very, very fascinated about what these ripples are doing and then how they gradually nudge the atmosphere. We're dealing with the butterfly effect. A little input 10 days ago creates a storm cascading off the top of a ridge and then developing into a wintertime event. So if you could play with the weather on very small scale, then you can control the weather. You control the weather and ultimately you control the planet. But it's these ripples, this run in here, come on, right there, how it kind of separates it bisects that whole cloud field across Nebraska, that other set of longitudinal ripples running north to south. So it's fascinating to look at the smoke then revealing these ripples that are in place, whether they're seen or not. All right, quick look out in the forecast. That area doesn't look like it's going to get a whole lot of moisture. That from at least the American GFS. The European model is somewhat more robust. It brings in some much more generous snows. So you probably know which my preference would be, and it would be to see the snow and let the fire simmer down, although those forests are loaded with dead wood, and ultimately it has to be burned out. Otherwise, it's going to sit there and rot and remain a risk for generations to come. So that standing timber has got to be dealt with. And the fire is the quickest way to clean up the forest, begin the regeneration process. Yes, there's a pulse of CO2 and carbon into the atmosphere, but once that happens, it becomes food worldwide. That the forests in New England, the forests in Europe and Asia, Africa, Canada, the Arctic can all then use that pulse of CO2 into the atmosphere for fuel, for growth next season. It's simple. It's a cycle of life stuff. All right, high temperature across the nation yesterday, 108, 17 miles east of Browley, California, 13 at Bridgeport, California. So California nagging the nation's high and low spot. Tropical disturbances, this guy still anticipated not to develop as it gets a little bit closer to the Windward Islands. When we started watching it, it was 700 miles plus off to the east, but now it's much closer to the Lesser Antilles. And across the nation, a nice barrier of dry air along those southern states, with the jet stream racing in along the north, and it is the cool winds behind this frontal boundary that is now approaching the western lakes. And in that, we are seeing some rain, a few thunder showers on closer inspection across New England, where we had some good rains the last couple of days, inch and a half worth of water. And that's good. They have been very dry as well. So we might as well get the water in there while the soils have not frozen yet for the season. Morning lows, quite a bit of 30s through Montana, certainly through the southern tier of the Canadian Prairie provinces, and then rather warm across Texas, Oklahoma, as they've busted through the 90s pretty aggressively, middle and a few close to upper 90s and low 100s, certainly through the lower desert Southwest, but through southern Idaho and Wyoming on the backside of this front. It's windy and it's cold. It's just cold when you combine the wind into that. So as we look at that front, here's the first one working its way through Kansas, not quite the Oklahoma handle. In fact, I'd say it's probably through Boise City, even though they're 90 to over 27 degrees. That cool front is probably through there, and then it extends out past Grand Junction. So the northerly winds have taken over. And what we need is an increase in moisture. We've got to have some rain showers showing up, but that just didn't happen as the main slug of moisture now racing quickly across the Great Lakes states, driven by those 40, 50 mile an hour winds, just headed eastbound in a hurry. Some snows, International Falls, Iron City area, far western Lake Superior. That'll probably convert over to a little bit of snow in the late night hours. But this ridge that was so flat yesterday has now begun to amplify, getting a little taller, getting a little bit taller yet. And as it does that, it displaces some cold up in Alaska, and then that cold tries to drive south into the states. But it just meets with just limited success. Just animate this on through the end of the 2 weeks. Something else we've talked about over the last couple of days is the development of a tropical storm / hurricane in the southern Caribbean. It comes up across Cuba and then just grazes Miami at this point. But it does look like towards the end of next week, we'll get a little bit of an idea if this is going to be a true event. And my bet is that we've been seeing a tropical storm down in the Caribbean and the far southwestern Atlantic for enough days now that some event of some form will occur. As far as the winds, should slacken up at the Cameron Peak fire, but there's still this cool front, this boundary just right there, hung up on the Colorado Rockies, and it's cold enough that they'll likely see a little bit of precip on the mountains, not lots. And then the next cold front races through here on Saturday afternoon, and then off to the east, really without delivering a whole lot of moisture. One of the other models is a little more aggressive, the European. We'll show that here, and its snow forecast begins to bring in some snow to that fire region middle of next week, actually towards the end of next week, and it may be enough to deal with the fire. And the European has historically been somewhat more accurate than the U.S. models. If this is my Louisiana viewer over here, the Facebook user saying no, then that tropical storm, all indications, every single run that I have seen, keep it east of you. So not an issue. We'll just let the Floridians deal with it, or the Cubans, and then off into the Bahamas. Let's keep our fingers crossed, say a little prayer that that'll be the situation. And then as we anticipate, hopefully, a little bit of rainfall for California. The models are trying to hint at some of that coming through. And as we get towards the weekend, we'll look at that. All right, coming up on another perspective at the top of the hour, 6 o'clock, I'm going to look at the reset. The reset that we all know is coming, that COVID prepared us for, was, let's just say, when the elite do something, they throw you a bone. Do you recognize what this bone is a beast of? And then do you chew the bone? Do you accept the bone? Or do you go, oh, that was my neighbor over there. I can't be doing that. So we've got to come to the position that we need to be able to have the strength and the clarity amongst the chaos that's coming to be able to envision our own future, or latch on to one that is more benevolent than the one that will be an edict from above. That's coming up in another perspective up at 6 o'clock Mountain, so about 45 minutes from now. Stick with me for a half hour, and then as we get into next Monday, I'll talk about food shortages, because I'm seeing some alarming stories out of Australia, New Zealand in particular, and even Canada, some stateside, where there's been quite literally sabotage for some cattle and corn supply. So there's just some crazy stuff happening, but that's on Monday. Today, we'll deal with the reset and where to throw our energy when this beast makes its appearance, its very prominent appearance on the global stage. All right, catch you in about 45 minutes. In the meantime, thanks, because LA's had enough this year. Oh, Louisiana, yeah, absolutely. You've had enough this year and next year, probably the year beyond. All right, guys, I'll catch you in about 25 minutes. No, 45 minutes. And stick with me through that. 'Cause we've got a lot to talk about. There's a lot of crazy things happening. All right, catch you in a little bit. In the meantime, keep looking up.